New tariffs go into effect next week for dozens of countries. President Trump giving them until today to make a trade agreement or face increased levies. Last night on The Takeout, Major Garrett spoke to the mayor of Detroit, who's running for governor as an independent, about the impact tariffs are having on businesses there.
If tariffs were done correctly, particularly for Mexico or China, they could be very helpful to Detroit and Michigan. The Canadian tariffs are a huge problem for us. See, when you put tariffs on Canadian parts, you're putting tariffs on cars from Michigan. And so I'm hoping the president will settle this so we get out of the tariff war with Canada. But I do think the right tariffs in Mexico and China could help us.
And we have team coverage for you on this morning. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer is tracking international fallout. But let's jump to CBS News chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes for the domestic view first. Good morning, Nancy. So for viewers waking up and just catching up, what is the status of tariff rates the U.S. is about to implement? Because there appears to have been a moving target.
That's right, Errol. But the president vowed that he was going to issue these new rates by August 1st. It is now August 1st, and here is the list. Dozens of countries on it. And in many cases, these new rates are lower than the rates that he initially threatened back in April on that so-called Liberation Day that really rattled the markets. But they're still pretty significant. We're still looking at a tariff regime that is going to be more aggressive than anything that the U.S. has seen since the 1930s. Dozens of countries are going to pay 10%, 15%, sometimes more, depending on whether the U.S. has a trade surplus with that country or a trade deficit, depending on whether the U.S. was able to negotiate a trade deal with this country in advance or not. Now, countries and U.S. companies that buy goods from those countries are going to have a week's worth of time to adjust to the new tariffs. As you can imagine, Errol, every company in America that imports goods from the rest of the world is going to be looking at this list, figuring out what's the rate in the country that I import from? Is it possible for me to get goods from somewhere else where it's cheaper? And how long would it take for me to change my supply chain system? And so that's what's going to be going on in boardrooms throughout the country this week. It will certainly bring more money into the U.S. Treasury because these new high tariff rates will be imposed. The question is how much of that cost will be passed on to customers, in the form of higher prices, and how much will have to be eaten by the U.S. companies that import these goods.
Yeah, one thing seems clear, things from overseas will be slightly more expensive. Nancy Cordes, we appreciate that update. Let's jump over now and look at the international impact of President Trump's tariffs and jump to CBS News senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer. Good morning, Liz. So we just saw the list of countries there. It looked like the credits from our favorite movie ending, but this is just beginning. What are you seeing from around the world?
Well, first to Europe. The EU countries as a bloc are the U.S.'s biggest trading partner. I've had a look at the markets. No wild swings today, probably because Europeans have known that the tariffs on EU goods would be 15%. For a few days, the EU chief, Ursula von der Leyen, met President Trump last weekend, and so the markets were prepared. I did, however, look specifically at Germany and France, the big ones here. They're just down a little. In the UK did a separate deal with President Trump and is only facing 10% tariffs. The main index in the UK is also slightly down. But overall, the markets seem to have shrugged this off. That's the headline, including in Asia, where similarly there's been a small decline.
And Liz, what about the U.S.'s third largest trading partner, Canada?
Well, Canadian markets aren't open yet, but expect to see a similar thing, a slight drop. On paper, it looks big. President Trump's executive order imposes a whopping 35% tariff on Canadian goods. He's still accusing Canada of failing to curb the flood of fentanyl into the United States, even though there's no evidence that's happening at all. However, that 35%, which looks pretty scary, will not affect most goods that the U.S. and Canada trade because they're already protected by a pre-existing agreement, the Canada-U.S.-Mexico trade agreement. And to the surprise of some people, the White House says it is going to continue to honor that. So real tariffs on Canadian goods maybe go from 5 to 6% if you average them out. Now, Canada's Prime Minister is saying he's disappointed, but I think probably behind the scenes he and Canadian business people are breathing a sigh of relief.
I think you're right about that. Elizabeth Palmer, thank you so much. Enjoy your weekend.